We all have stories that we say to ourselves, but how do you know whether or not these stories are helping you or if they're hurting you?
And no trauma, whatever you've experienced, it is absolutely, and no one can take this away from you, it's absolutely a part of your story. There's always another chapter for you to write in the aftermath of it.
Hey, everybody, it's Bianca.
Welcome back, Evolvers. It's Amelia. Episode 477, Why Healing is Possible, Even When Trauma Says Otherwise. Bianca and I will be sharing a couple of stories in this episode and a huge takeaway that we as Evolvers want to make sure that you have, so that if you've had trauma, and whether or not you've acknowledged that or whether or not you've gone through the work and kind of experienced it fully, you can walk away from this episode really understanding what is that underpinning foundational skill set that you need to have so that your trauma does not define you.
So, this episode came from a client that I was working with. I'm going to name him Andrew. We try to make sure that we keep everything confidential and anonymous to protect client anonymity. So, I'm in confidentiality. So, I'm going to call him Andrew. So, Andrew and I just started working together. I've only had a couple of sessions with him, and he's a young kid. He's around 18, and he actually just got out of a outpatient intensive care facility. And there's a pretty low percentage of people who ever end up going or needing something like an IOP, which is what it's called. It's an outpatient intensive program. And he went in there because he was struggling significantly with his mental health and how he saw himself. And he even started having really scary thoughts of wanting to hurt himself and wanting to hurt other people, which isn't actually super uncommon. I know, as weird as that might sound, but it was something that he was experiencing. It scared the living daylights out of him. So he went into this intensive outpatient program, and he started working with me when he came out of the program. So, as we always do, I went through this intake process with him, and I'm asking him questions. I'm trying to get to know him a little bit, understand his life, his backstory. So we're a couple of sessions in, and I said, Andrew, I want to understand what you guys did at this program so that I can help you and so that we can add onto what you've already done and be able to add more from it. So I had him bring his notes with him. We went through some of the topics that they had went through, and I said, if you had to give me, a summary of what some of the biggest lessons and takeaways were that you took away from this program, what would they be? And one of the big ones that he had referenced, and I wrote it down, was he previously had this mindset of, I can't do things. I'm not capable of doing things. I can't do hard things. I need help from other people. I'm not capable. And after going to this program, he started developing this mindset and this belief because of what they taught him, which is, I can do hard things. It's going to be challenging. I might not be great at it right away, but over time, I can eventually learn and I can figure it out. Now, what he was referring to, and I highlighted this to him because he didn't know that this is what he was talking about, is the difference between a growth mindset and a fixed mindset. Now, we've done episodes on this in the past, but what we are going to be specifically diving into today is how a growth versus a fixed mindset impacts your ability to heal from trauma. And more specifically, what we're going to be diving into today is the notion that it is not possible for you to heal from trauma if you aren't cultivating over time a growth mindset, which comes to the name of the episode. Healing is possible even if your trauma is telling you otherwise, and that is through a growth mindset. So that is what we're going to be diving
Nice.
into today.
I love that. I love that. In my training with my trauma cohort, we talked about this a lot. So, for those of you who are not aware, I am trauma certified. Bianca and I do a lot of work with trauma survivors. We're very proud of the work that we do at Evolve with people who do not want their trauma to define who they are. And in that work that we had done, I remember learning so deeply about this, Bianca, to have a standpoint that got into the neuroscience underneath of why this is so critical. And while I won't get super
Fun.
nerdy on this episode, we can all do our own research on that should we be interested. It is wild how when we tell our brain, and there's a very common quote, whether you think you can or you can't, it's true. Right? It's a very common saying that people hear. And as it pertains to this topic, whether you tell yourself or a part of you, whatever the traumatized part of you is, or your mind is quote unquote doing these tricks on you and saying, I cannot do X, Y, or Z. I cannot achieve healing. I cannot go through said process of healing or recovery because insert narrative, excuse, or justifiable quote unquote reason in your mind. That is what your brain will essentially encourage you to go down. And that's what's so risky about a fixed mindset, because if you think you can't, your brain is literally allowing that to be true. It's not going to give you quote unquote evidence that you're capable, because our thoughts in our own capabilities, especially when it comes to trauma surviving and trauma recovery and the process that really does take, it really is so much about rewriting the narrative about what you believe about yourself, because anyone in the aftermath of their own traumatic experiences, what we do know is that so many of us have a really hard time trying to make sense of who we are, our identity, our levels of self-esteem get wildly impacted depending on what type of trauma you experience. And all of that really jostles things up and just puts you into this self-protective quote unquote shield that says, I can do X, I can't do Y. And on the other side of Y is essentially all the things that are going to help you gain the practice that is absolutely necessary, the exposure that's absolutely necessary, the thought patterning that is absolutely necessary to develop a growth mindset about whatever that capability is. So, and I'll give a quick example to make this a little bit more tangible. So in the past, I've also referenced before my, maybe not necessarily in detail, some of my traumatic experiences, but essentially that led to a fixed mindset about my memory. So I can't remember this because insert XYZ, right? There was a narrative that I was building up, and by saying that, it reinforced a fixed mindset about my brain's capabilities, and my memories at large, which then had a quote unquote limit as to what I was capable of doing or not. So in the real world, this looked like I wasn't able to quote unquote listen to someone because my brain wanted to tell me that I wouldn't be able to remember what they were going to say. And so either I wasn't able to listen to them, or I needed to make sure that I had a notebook so that I could write down every single word, because all of these quote unquote narratives would chalk it up to I can't remember. I couldn't recall it. And so literally by doing that act, by only focusing in on the notes, what I wasn't doing was developing, this is going to be hard to remember, and you might not remember it on the first time, but if you try over time, you can learn how to remember and how to recall better, right? So that's a tiny example of obviously so many different other types of traumas and what the aftermath is. But the lesson here is what we feed our brain, it will continue. And unless we have someone that has an outside perspective that helps us learn how to retrain our brain a little bit differently post-trauma, it becomes extremely hard, because we're literally just developing neural grooves that are allowing us to repeat the same exact thoughts to ourselves. So Bianca, I'm super curious about this, because a lot of people don't think that they have a fixed mindset. And yet, one of the things that's fascinating about the research on growth and fixed mindset, so I think we should define it before I even go into that. A growth mindset, for anyone that's new, on this is essentially you believe that over time with practice and as you apply yourself, you can get good or get better at anything. And you can apply that in your skills, your capabilities, your own levels of self-esteem, self-worth, self-belief, etc. So you can grow. In other words, your capabilities, your mindset, you're not fixed. And that's what the fixed mindset says. The fixed mindset is a collection of thoughts, ideas, beliefs, behaviors that essentially say, my current level of capabilities as they are fixed and cannot be changed. So I just have to live with it. And I know a lot of people in, for example, mathematics, school, growing up, academics, you saw that a lot. So Bianca, this is where I was super fascinated. When you shared what the highlight between what he was saying and what he experienced in that inpatient experience and what some of those biggest lessons were for him. And you illuminated that this was the growth versus fixed mindset. And then essentially that facility had helped him to develop and really rediscover how he, with effort, with practice, can get better at these things. What was that like for you to witness, and what did he go through in terms of that like aha moment, seeing the difference of like, oh, holy crap, that is a growth mindset and that is what I'm now capable of? Because I know for trauma survivors, sometimes it feels like that's like whatever it is, be it memory or be it driving again, something. Sometimes it just feels literally your feeling becomes your reality. You think it's your reality.
Yeah. Well, he actually is not a trauma survivor. He went in there more so for the intrusive thoughts that he was having and his fears of then acting on those intrusive thoughts. It ended up turning out that he has OCD. And so a lot of the thought processes that he was having were obsessive, based on obsessive compulsive disorder and not based on trauma. But he was very surprised by it because he very much grew up in a household where things were just done for him. Kind of to the episode that we dove into about how always getting helped can turn you into a victim. Right. He very much had that experience as well, where his family just did everything for him. So he never had to learn how to do anything. And so going into this program, it was the first time that he ever had to develop skills on his own without someone just doing it for him. But I will use a different client in particular. So there's a client that I've been working with. I want to say it's been 3, almost 4 years now. And I referenced her previously, and she has a substantial history of trauma. I mean, she has been traumatized from the age of 2 in every way you can think of. It's been horrific. And she and I started working together after she had a very traumatic instance happen. And she came to me. We started working together, and she very much had a fixed mindset. And like, nothing is ever going to change for me, no matter how hard I try. It doesn't matter. I'm so far gone. Nobody will ever be able to relate to me because no one has ever experienced this level of trauma that I have in this long span of a time. Like, how is someone ever going to want to be with me or even be around me? Or how am I ever going to be able to do things again? So she very much had a fixed mindset, and anyone from the outside looking in, if they were to hear her story, they would probably agree with her. They'd say, honestly, it makes sense you think that. It makes sense you feel that way. What you went through was horrific and immoral, and just the things that you've experienced are just graphic in every sense of the word. And anyone hearing her story would be like, yeah, it makes sense you think that way. Like, keep it, you know? And being a therapist, you kind of have to be, if you want to be a good therapist, you kind of got to be delusional a little bit, in the sense of believing that someone has the capacity and the potential to outgrow and navigate and heal through their present circumstances. And the reason I say you have to be a little delusional about it is because you have to believe it 100 times more than the person does.
Yeah.
And you have to be good enough to be able to, over time, in a adaptive, positive, healthy way, influence and persuade this person to believe it for themselves and help them on their own accord to believe it, to obtain the evidence to validate that, and then to actually start believing it for themselves based on their own experiences. And that's exactly what ended up happening with this person. She's in the best space she's ever been in her entire life. And we actually had a session the other day, and she's like, you know what's weird? I was having this conversation with someone, and at the space that they're currently at in their life, they've just about reached the cap. They can't make more in their job. They're about to hit the upper limit of what they can make in their field. They aren't on, good terms with their family, and that's never going to change. Just unfortunately, it just is true. And there's all of these other circumstances that are going on where this person has reached the upper limit, and not based on a negative belief, but based on reality. And she was like, you know what was so weird? For the first time in my life, I'm actually just at the beginning. Where I'm at and what I'm making and what's possible for me, I'm just at the very beginning, and I can keep growing from here.
Cool.
And I said, why is that possible? And she said, because I started developing a belief that I can do hard things, that it might be hard, but I can figure it out. I'm capable of advocating for myself now. I'm capable of asking for my needs and saying what I want and what I don't want. And I'll put in the work to eventually get to that part or to get that outcome. She basically just explained all of the criteria for a growth mindset. So she went from nothing is possible for me, I might as well complete suicide, to I have the entire world open to me, and I can do within reason almost anything that I want.
That's freaking amazing.
And if that's possible for her, you best believe it's possible for any of you watching this too.
That's one of the things that I find that when trauma survivors share their story, it brings that quote unquote hope and real experience, like real life evidence to the forefront for other people, whether it be clinicians or people that are going through their own traumatic experiences and trying to heal and recover and going through that growth journey while applying their growth mindset. It's so powerful that trauma survivors really do share their stories, because we all need that evidence, that we all need that quote unquote delulu, meaning the actual belief beyond what a current person's fixed mindset believes is possible. And that delulu isn't just delulu, right? It's straight up evidence and experience and stories that someone has that they can borrow that belief to apply to this context and setting. Like Bianca, I mean, you and I have so many different stories of so many people, and different people's stories that they've persevered beyond some of the most horrific things that you could even imagine, right? And I know for me, as someone sitting in the chair of holding that safe space for someone who's developing that evidence for themselves as they are on the path of healing, are on the path of recovery, I can share, obviously anonymously, but I know that that keeps me believing that there's so much more available and possible, no matter how difficult the circumstances that you have had or had to go through have been. And I just find that such like an exciting thing, because of the fact that wherever, dear listener, you are at right now, there are so many people's stories who are available to you that you haven't yet heard, that are fuel to the path that you're headed down right now. And I remember in some of even my own deepest, darkest times when I didn't even want to admit what had happened to me. I didn't want to even look at what I had experienced. And I'm sure your clients felt the same way. And Bianca, you and I have talked about this on our own accords behind this. You know, like when you go through something horrific, the last thing that you tend to want to lean towards is going through it again through this process of healing and recovery. And part of that simulation can really bring up that horrible experience. And so when you're on that track and when you're on that, it's like you feel completely hopeless, helpless, and you don't, like, your trauma literally is like, yeah, no, this is not possible. But in some of those darkest moments, I do know hearing other people's stories is what 100% helped me to believe it was possible for me too. And it helped my fixed mindset as a result of how my system of parts tried to cope with the aftermath of trauma, because that was the only thing that was quote unquote known at the time. Hearing other people experiencing and their stories having experienced what I had, I know it let that seed that got germinated really plant in my consciousness of like, oh my goodness, no two traumas are the same. That's fact. But our stories and how we process them and the courage that it requires for us to move through it on the healing journey, it has overlap, parallels, and community always. And I think that that's one of the most inspiring things.
And it's not to compare trauma. I just wanted to make sure that I make a note of that. Hearing other people's stories isn't for you to then say, oh my God, they went through something tragic, I shouldn't complain.
No,
Because
it's opposite effect.
because it's so easy to get caught into that trap of, oh my God, nothing like that happened to me. So let me go down a shame spiral and
Minimize
guilt
what I
and
went through.
berate myself because I didn't go through what that person went through. I always give this example and people's jaw drop. I'm like, okay, imagine two people walk into an ER. They both got into an accident, but one of them, their arm is completely ripped off, but the other one, the arm is completely shattered and mangled and is going to need, tons of surgeries and physical therapy. Should the person whose arm is mangled not complain because, well, at least I still have an arm? It's like, both are terrible. We don't need to trauma compare. Your trauma is yours because of your experiences, because you're a person, which means that it matters. So the point of hearing stories is not to say, well, I didn't go through it as bad as they did, so shame on me. The point is to gather evidence that healing and growth are possible, even in the most extreme circumstances, which means if it was possible for them, it's possible for you, and not out of a space of shame, but out of a space of hope and encouragement and proactivity. And that's, again, where a growth mindset really comes into play. If you do not believe that it is possible for you, you won't even try. And then you'll stay stuck in your trauma for the rest of your life.
Yeah. I've seen too many people in that zone, and it just breaks my heart because as soon as they don't believe it's possible, it's like a wall. Every time a part of them who wants to have healing or wants to have peace or wants to have recovery on the other side, they get shut down because they don't believe it's possible. It's just this like drawbridge that just drops every single time. And so they're never, ever able to quote unquote make progress in comparison to someone who does develop the baseline foundational skill of a growth mindset. So if you're out there right now and you're really experiencing that and you're realizing that you're hearing that I can't because, or I don't know how I will, insert whatever is in the line after that, right? That is a great indicator that as a result of what you have been through, your system of parts in your brain out of self-preservation and self-protection to try to never have that happen again is going to quick mind shortcuts that are dropping that drawbridge and are saying you can't, or you're incapable of, or you'll never have X. It's saying those things as a quick mind habit so that you never experience that again. And ultimately that's going to hurt you long term because of the fact that you'll never develop this growth mindset. So if you're in that space, please reach out to us. This is something that Bianca and I breathe day in, day out. And it's stories like those clients that we want to elevate because we know and we want to create a platform where we can talk about those survivors and people who are in total recovery and who have done a 180 in their life because at one point, maybe even before they saw us, they didn't believe it was possible too. And it came coming to evolve and having someone believing in them and actually showcasing what is possible that actually helped them lead that way and not do so alone. So we hope that that is something that you realize is literally a click away for you. And we couldn't be more excited to serve anyone who is on that journey right now, because we know that there's nothing worse than being on that journey where your trauma is saying it's not possible, XYZ, whatever it is, and then also feeling alone on that. And that just sucks. No one deserves to be there. So
No.
With that being said, my episode suggestion in rounding out today's episode is 407, the fear of finally using your voice. Sometimes that voice is just asking for help or for support or sending a DM and saying, hey, Amelia, I want to unpack some of what my trauma is saying, right? That takes a lot of courage. So Bianca, final thoughts and episode suggestion.
457, polyvagal theory, the key to well-being. Your trauma is going to try to send you a narrative that nothing is possible for you anymore and that you are defective and broken. The truth is, it's just not true. It's not. And for most people, getting to the other side of that is going to be through getting really good therapy. And that doesn't mean that you're bad and you can't do it on your own. It means that you were finally courageous enough to ask for help. And that's why the other people won't do it. So be one of the people who does, who actually gets to live the rest of their life and not let their trauma define them. And we can't wait to see you on the other side of that.
Let's go. Time for you to write a new chapter in your story. So if you want to learn more about our programs, please click the link in the show notes. And as always, thank you for your interest in the science of holistic mental health. We are so excited to have you keep evolving on this journey with us and help you see what is actually possible for you. We'll talk soon, everyone. Bye.